It's so true that you have to choose where you want to put your effort, and you have to choose what's going to be hard in life. If you think it's hard to stay on top of what you put in your body, to try to get better sleep, to work out with some level of consistency every week, try the hardness of being sick, the hardness of the side effects of medication, the hardness of not being available to the ones that you love, the hardness of not being able to enjoy life because you don't feel good.
Right. And Dr. Mark Hyman was quoting another doctor. He said, the heart attack at 50 began at 20.
Wow.
And the Alzheimer's at 70 started at 40. And the loss of independence at 80 began at 30.
Wow.
The aging you want tomorrow begins with the choices you make today.
I want to talk about something today that is extremely important. Have you known anyone, whether they were in your family or someone close to you, that came in contact with the dreadful disease of Alzheimer's or dementia? And these things that affect the brain has become so common that it's almost scary. And today, we're going to talk about some breakthrough research that's being done to see what we can do to prevent this from happening to ourselves and those that we love. And so I want you to follow us on a very, very important discussion that is so critical to so much that is happening today. And before I even jump in, I just want to say, there's a lot of people that I know and that I love and that I pray for, people that have been a part of my life and people that are a part of my life that have been affected by this. And any of you out there that are being affected by this, or you know someone who is, our thoughts and prayers are with you, because we know this is a very, very sensitive subject because of the gravity in which it has affected so many of us. Now, today, I'm going to have, the great pleasure of having one of my executives here with me who is not only a senior instructor for our curriculum and all the things we teach here at URCO, but also someone who has a long history of providing training, motivating people, building teams, overseeing programs, crafting programs, being able to work with all kinds of scenarios and getting people to get the most out of themselves. An avid studier of the brain, following some of the greatest thought leaders who study things related to how our brain and body function in an effort to help people get more out of themselves. This is a great treat because we're gonna not only hear from this individual and all that they have learned and acquired in knowledge, but someone who has a very close relationship with the topic, and I'm going to explain that here in just a moment. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Terry Fulton. Terry, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. Thank you for the kind words, and it's good to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. It's been a while since we got together and kind of talked like this, and so I want to get into some things and a lot I want to talk about. Before we unpack that, though, I want to pull up here on my phone an article, which I know you've read as well, and you might point out some things in case I miss anything. But I want all of you to understand, what is so interesting about this. And this is from the Medical News Today. And, it asks the question, basically, could being more active in middle age help prevent Alzheimer's disease? And so basically, there was a past study that linked physical activity with a decreased risk for many health issues, including Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. The new study found that increased physical activity levels, especially during middle age, are associated with reduced amounts of Alzheimer's disease biomarker beta amyloid in the brain. Researchers also discovered that being inactive during this time was linked to atrophy in the brain. All those regions associated with Alzheimer's disease were affected through in activity. And so there was a lot of things in here that begin to break down the research. And one thing I want to point out is that researchers really found that increasing physical activity levels during middle age, being 45 to 65, and associated with lower concentrations of the protein beta amyloid, a known biomarker for Alzheimer's disease in the brain. In other words, the more people did this, they saw lower biomarkers of the thing that they have found a direct correlation to causing these diseases. So this study was done, I think it was about 337 participants, and it really honed in on the midlife being a critical period. So we're going to unpack this a little bit more. We might come back and refer to this, a little bit here and there. But I think there was these groups, and one group remained sedentary, one group exercised, but not enough to adhere to the guidelines. Group 3 reached and maintained the guidelines of the proper workout. And group 4 started with the guidelines, but then became non-adherent to them. And group 5 started non-adherent and then went to the guidelines. So upon the analysis, researchers found that participants who increased their physical activity according to the exercise guidelines that they recommended, which I believe included, some cardio and strength training, had the lower amounts of the protein that in the brain can lead to these diseases. So I'm going to just pause here for a minute because you read this too. What are some things that stood out to you about this article, Terry? What kind of jumped at you?
Well, I think one thing people need to understand is they were hearing you say the guidelines. So that was from the World Health Organization. Mm-hmm. So that was who set those guidelines. And one thing that was encouraging is it got specific to the protein and the thing that can lead to dementia or, Alzheimer's and things like that. So the breakthrough was in the results of the study. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the basic common sense of it, it's really not breakthrough. And that's what's fascinating to me, right? Things that we already noted. It's amazing to me that we have to find proof like this and do studies like this to find the right behaviors that we know can make us be more healthy. So that's one thing I thought about it. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is what they define as midlife, right? Because when you think about life expectancy, for females, I think it's right around 79, 80 years old. And for males, it's more around 75, 77 years old. Mm-hmm. So technically, middle age is 35, 40. Technically, right? But they did these studies with people a little bit older, and just kind of labeling that midlife. But, there's a quote that I might read to you a little bit later that I found that some of these things we might need to even think about even younger than 45 to 65.
Yeah. And before we kind of get to that, when you think about it, I often tell people a lot of times we know what we need to do with our health and our fitness, but we won't take it seriously until a doctor tells us.
Right.
When the doctor tells us that if you don't do this, you're going to get to this outcome. Because you can't see the damage that behavior causes. Right. Oftentimes we won't change our behavior. So what do you think, kind of along with what you brought up about it's amazing that this is even a breakthrough, what do you think is going on in that we can't perceive the damage of something until the damage is there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I just don't think we like to think about our own mortality.
That's good.
I think it's an uncomfortable conversation that people have. But as we often say in many of our trainings and programs, the day that we are born, we're actually progressing towards death.
Right.
That's just what's true.
That's right.
And we're not talking about people's personal beliefs in the afterlife. I'm just this natural life.
Right.
The day we are born, we progress towards death. Mm-hmm. And we have to start to ask ourselves what quality of life that we want to have. And we have to have very honest conversations with ourselves. It's a lot to unpack what you're saying, and you kind of know where I'm coming from when I say this. People can ignore it because they're thinking about themselves or not thinking about themselves until it happens. But even when it happens to somebody that they love, they still won't change their behavior because they don't see it happening to them.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And here's somebody that you might have to care for and you're going through and it's impacting your day-to-day life because you're the caretaker, but you're not thinking about, am I following in these same footsteps? What do I have to change in my life to make sure that I have the quality of life that I value? So it's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah. You really said some powerful things there. And, I think it's really good for everyone to understand something that you went through. And I know it's very personal, but, I wanted to make sure before we even talked about this that you were comfortable and you said like, hey, everything's on the table, because I know you want to see people be made better through this. And, your father came in contact with this disease and you saw firsthand what this disease can do. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Like, what was it like to go from the father you've always known to then starting to recognize that something had entered into his life and it changed everything you knew about him?
Yeah, and let me thank you again for being here, because these stories I think are important for people to hear, because when you love someone who raised you, took care of you, or somebody that you married, or somebody that you spent time with, your life with, it's a harsh reality to have to be able to manage that, right? And to see that. And here you are, you have your full comprehension, and you can see what somebody's going through.
Right.
You see them progressively losing their quality of life, right? And so my dad, he was type 2 diabetic. When they diagnosed him with dementia, they were talking about these newer studies that's coming out with type 3 diabetes, right? Which they're kind of saying that this is a condition that can progress into dementia and certain types of dementia, because, your brain operates on a lot of things, right? And if you have different things going on in your bloodstream, or if you have cut off your oxygen, see what happens to your brain.
Right.
So type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, it can wreak havoc even on your brain. And it's amazing, just a side note, how we don't think about the brain.
Right.
We think about heart disease, we think about lung disease, we think about cancer, but we don't think about the brain, right? The thing that helps us function. And when my dad was diagnosed with dementia, I knew it was bad news. And I kind of started to see, some people live years with dementia, and some people it progresses fairly quickly.
Right.
And with my father, once he was diagnosed, it was a pretty fast progression. And so the first thing that I started to see was he was losing his ability to think, and he lost his ability to remember. He couldn't really organize his thoughts. He would get disoriented. And so he had sundowners, this, kind of situation where they're up really late at night.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they kind of get confused with night and day and things like that.
Yeah.
So we started to see he lost his ability to be independent.
Right.
And so we had to make a decision to get him into a home. There was a few areas where he stayed, and then we got him into a home. Even one time he got disoriented and got out of the home.
Wow.
And got lost. He was missing for like 24 hours. The police found him. He had fallen. He was kind of beat up and things. So I just saw him lose his independence. That was the first thing that I saw start to happen. And then he started to progress, and it's different for different people, right?
Yeah,
so, but this is kind of as a progression, right? So I started to see his inability to communicate. He can form words, but it didn't make sense, what he was saying. And maybe, if we have a chance, I could tell you even like watching my siblings go through this.
Yeah.
Because they were a little closer to it physically than I was. I was watching it from a distance, but I was involved the whole time.
Right.
But my siblings were the ones picking them up and interfacing with them and things like that. and they struggled. I mean, they had a hard time. You know, my dad would say things that didn't make sense, and they would argue with them,
Right.
which, you know, incited him and irritated him because, you know, this man can't communicate, you know what I
Right.
mean? And so it's like I had to calm him down and say, he's still the same man. He just can't communicate like he
Right.
used to. He's sick.
Yeah.
You know, and then that began to grow into he lost his mobile skills. And, you know, he was on a walker for a while. Then he just didn't have the capacity to even move around. So he ended up in a wheelchair, and we had to help him get around and things like that. And then, you know, the final stage really was he just, you know, lost his appetite, stopped eating and everything. And then you just see one organ fail after another.
Yeah.
And the toughest thing for us to add insult to injury was it was during COVID and he was in a home, so we couldn't even go in to see him.
Wow.
So we had to watch him pass through a window.
Wow.
We couldn't even be there beside him. And so it was tough to see. It was tough to watch. And all of that happened probably over a 2-year period in
Wow.
terms of the fast progression.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but I think about that experience, and I came to grips with it because I understood it, because I've been studying things before and things like that, and this kind of got me even deeper into the studies. So I was able to come to grips with it, but it was still really hard.
Yeah.
I remember my brother called me when he passed, and I just came home, I hugged my mom, made sure she was okay, and I just went upstairs, and then I was just overflowing with uncontrollable emotion, right?
Yeah.
And just trying to come to grips with everything. And then, you know, we have our own app on Uplift. And so about 30 minutes after uncontrolled emotions, I just wiped my tears and I just posted a tribute to my pop on Uplift. And then I started seeing all this love come in, and then I kind of just started to get out of that space.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a traumatic experience, but this article is trying to help people not have to go through that themselves or have to go through that with their loved ones, and it's something we should pay attention to.
Yeah, and I really, really thank you for sharing a lot of the intimate details. And again, you know, it's, you know, being a part of your life, knowing you were, you know, going through that and watching you come through that. And I want to commend you too. I think you handled it very well. I know it's a very emotional thing, but I think you did stay strong, and you were strong for him, strong for your family, and still doing the things you needed to do. But I know sometimes it's a lot to carry. And I want to go back to, before maybe building on it a little bit, going back to some of the things he was dealing with, because I know a big part that is always tough. You mentioned it, sometimes he would communicate things that didn't make sense. And another big thing is just when people start dealing with memory loss, like, you know, call you by the wrong name, say something not associated with you, or sometimes it's short-term memory, long-term memory. Was that a factor with him too? What was that like? Because I know you want to know someone remembers all that you've done together and been together and seen together. What was that like?
It was tough. Especially for my youngest siblings. As you know, I have a 61-year-old brother and I have a 19-year-old brother. So my siblings span decades.
Range. Yeah.
And so my youngest sister and my youngest brother really struggled because, you know, he didn't know who he was talking to a lot of time. And it wasn't long before he kind of started to lose those memories that they were his life. Like anytime I talked to my dad, he was always talking about my baby brother, my baby sister.
Yeah.
But that kind of
They didn't get as long with him.
Exactly, and that changed some. Or sometimes my dad would call me and we end up being on the phone and I would be navigating the conversation with them, and then he would say, "Thank you for calling me, I appreciate it." But he called me.
Yeah.
You know, and things like that. Or when it got really progressive, and you might see me giggle a little bit because I chose to hang out with the person that I always knew.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about what he said.
Yeah.
It's about his personality. He was still in there.
Yeah.
So there was one time we're having a family gathering at one of my brother's house in San Jose, and he's talking about these monkeys that are across the street. And he's just laughing, and he's like, man, they was crazy. These monkeys was everywhere. And he was having a good time telling the story.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing with him
Yeah,
because
go with
I'm
it, yeah.
enjoying the personality.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
see that he's still there.
Right.
My siblings struggled. They're like, there's no monkeys, you know, and then
Yeah.
that would agitate them. And it
Yeah.
would, and, you know, not all my siblings were like that. You know, some kind of, you know, were in the middle, but there was a range of emotions. But some people, it was really hard to see him lose his capacity to even know who he's spending time with and talking to and hanging out with. And so, you know, but there was one time, what's strange about it is there's moments of clarity sometimes. And so there was one time we went to a home and he was put on hospice and we knew he probably wouldn't make it out of the home. But when we were leaving my brothers, he just put his hands out and he just hugged each and every one of us. It was one of the last times I saw him. And so, you know, you kind of go in and out. There might be this moment of clarity, and then there's just like this disease is just wreaking havoc on this man's quality of life. So it's an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that, and so glad you were able to get some of those times with him, as well as being able to appreciate the personality, as you said, even when it manifested in ways that were a little awkward.
Right.
But you still had a chance to connect with who he was. And I want to build on this though, because in you know, we're talking about this whole kind of episode and focus on this research that came out. I want to talk about how, you know, there's a lot of people who will see this, and I think this has become so common that it is a real thing you think about, like, will something like that happen to me as I get older? You know what I mean? And I know older people that are older think about it. Some are faced with some things, they're starting to have certain symptoms. But let's talk a little bit about prevention. And I think sometimes people make a mistake of feeling like what they do today won't impact tomorrow. And I know there was some things you were looking at too, that, you know, some really interesting statements that was made, I think, you know, by Mark Hyman and different ones, where there's a lot of thought into the dramatic effect of what you do earlier affecting you later. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. There's a quote, I think I read this to you earlier, and Dr. Mark Hyman was quoting another doctor. He said, the heart attack at 50 began at 20.
Wow.
And the Alzheimer's at 70 started at 40. And the loss of independence at 80 began at 30.
Wow.
The aging you want tomorrow begins with the choices you make today. Right?
Yeah.
And so, and even some of these things, you know, 20 and 40 and 30, that's really the middle age.
Right.
You don't have to wait till 45, 50, 60, 65.
Right.
So I think sometimes we don't pay attention to the choices that we're making as damage to our bodies, to our brain, to our blood, you know, to our organs. I think, you know, we call things comfort food when it's really disease food. You know what I mean? Or we put things together with like family gatherings and culture, and it's nice in the moment. It'll give you memories in the moment, but there's a reckoning that is coming if we're not careful. And so, you know, I think we really need to look at studies like this. We need to look at what's even in front of us. I'm sure most people looking at this know somebody that's in this situation that we're talking about, or knows of someone. But doesn't it make you think about yourself and what you can do? Because there are things you can do. There are things that all of us can do to make sure that we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to avoid these things.
And that's the thing about the best opportunity, right? Because we can't control the future, but we can control the potential of having a better future, right? And so I know you do a lot of training in, you know, large organizations as well as amongst entrepreneurs, in you know, helping people understand something that's true it takes something to do that, because first we got to know what the truth is. Mm-hmm. And then once we know the truth, we have to decide if we want to listen to it, if we want to make it be a part of our life or something that just, we heard, Mm-hmm. So when you think about the truth, we know we need to eat, move, and sleep. We know it matters what we put in our body. We know that America specifically has turned a blind eye to what true health is, mm-hmm. right? It's more about, sick management more than healthcare. So we know there's the processed sugar and what it's doing. There's so much information now. We're in the age of artificial intelligence. So it's not about the knowledge.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't say you don't know. Mm-hmm. Like either you don't want to know or you do know, and you just, for whatever reason, can't bring yourself to create a change within your heart and mind that's going to really, dictate what you do every day.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about change and truth. What do you say about, what are some of your thoughts about, when we come in contact with truth, why it's so hard for people to change?
It's interesting. I think people you're familiar with the 1% rule, mm-hmm. right? Make a 1% change every day. You do that over time, you're gonna make drastic changes in your life.
Right.
I think sometimes we think change is hard because we see the end result and it's so far away. Mm-hmm. Instead of controlling what's in our control. What can I do today? What decision can I make today? We make excuses for our behavior too, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't like to own up to things. We don't like to look in the mirror and face. The first truth we have to accept is where we're wrong.
Right.
And then we got to make these changes, right? And it's not that daunting when you break it down into the most simplest thing that we can focus on. So I'll give you a quick story of what I did in a training one time and an outcome, and then I'll kind of bring it back to the article with maybe some of the things that we might have to think about societally though. So I'm in a training and I'm doing creating excellence as a culture, mm-hmm. right? And so, excellence is going beyond what the expected is, mm-hmm. and, doing it every day, doing your best. So I was letting them know, like, if you just went for a walk at 3 miles an hour, which isn't speed walking,
right,
for 20 minutes a day, that's 1 mile. Everybody has 20 minutes. And if you're mobile, you can do that. Just go for a walk at 3 miles an hour for 20 minutes every day. That'll turn into 7 miles a week. That'll be 28 miles in a month, right? Mm-hmm. And so you start to kind of think about that. Where would you be a month from now, a quarter from now, half a year from now, a year from now? So a lady actually took me up on it. I didn't know she would.
Right.
And she started to go for a walk 20 minutes a day. I didn't see her again for another 4 months or so. She came back. She looked great. She felt great. She was very, very vibrant. And she told me in front of all the other participants, I took you up on your challenge. And by week 3, I was up to 1.5 miles.
Wow.
She said by week 6, I was up to 2 miles every day. She said, not only that, my husband joined me on these walks. And now he's healthier. And we're having better conversations because we're spending quality time together. Mm. And that's all done in less than an hour a day. If you did that for 20 minutes a day, that's less than 2.5 hours out of your 168-hour week.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Absolutely.
That's something that we can do.
Yeah. And I, we're talking to people sometimes about, leveling and not overwhelming your schedule, overwhelming your life. It's like the person who lets the dishes pile up all week.
Exactly.
And then dishwashing becomes this daunting task. And you say, I hate dishwashing.
Right.
No, you hate dishwashing like you're washing dishes,
right.
Because same thing with the laundry. If you let it pile up all month, you say, I hate laundry because it takes forever. It only takes forever because you
right.
do it so infrequently. But if it was a little piece that you did and you were more strategic, it wouldn't feel that way. And one thing that I think is so critical is that a lot of times we don't do anything because we don't see the immediate effect, the immediate outcome. We don't lose 20 pounds tomorrow. We don't automatically, our A1C changes right then. Our blood pressure goes down. So you get this what's the use mentality. And I think it really causes a lot of people to stay in comfort because they don't they don't want to weather the waiting period to get to the fullness of the outcome that will come from the behavior.
Exactly.
So we see this back with the marshmallow study and all those things, right? But the reality is that you wonder why, you think about the effect of the society we have now of social media, Instagram, likes, instant notifications, text messages, everything's immediate. I was talking when we were younger and just remembering when there was no internet. Like, we're getting older because we got the old stories now, but there was no internet. There was no cell phone.
Smartphone.
Yeah, you wonder how did you deal without having a cell phone,
street
right?
lights.
Yeah, the street lights and all of that. But you thought about like what was you doing, but you used more of your brain. You were more creative. You waiting was a part of life.
Yeah.
You had to wait. I had to wait to see you, to talk to you. I couldn't just call you, right? Whenever I want, text you. So, but what is that doing to our perspective on the things that matter, like health, like fitness? Because we have this immediate gratification that is almost being programmed into us, but it's affecting us in so many ways.
We're making it easier to sit down. We're making it easier to have a sedentary lifestyle.
That's powerful.
And there's a few reasons for that. People work a lot just to make ends meet.
Right.
And a lot of people are working for a long time, sitting in traffic, sitting at their desk, sitting in their cubicle, sitting in their chair, answering phones. Even if they're doing other retail jobs, they're on their feet, but they're really not moving.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're like standing in one place for a long period. So this is the working class that we're talking about. These are like the majority of people that, they're stuck in a spot.
Right.
Then on top of that, and this is kind of going back to the article a little bit, but then there's the entertainment part of it. So now I'm sitting all day at work, I come home, I sit down again, and I'm gonna watch sports games, or I'm gonna watch, my favorite Netflix, I'm gonna binge, I'm gonna watch movies, I'm sitting again, and all these different things. And then from a societal standpoint, they did research in this area, like what can neighborhoods and cities do different to foster this kind of behavior? You grew up in the inner city, you grew up in the Iron Triangle, Richmond, California. Who wants to go for a walk in that neighborhood, right? Or in the cities, in the projects in Chicago, or, in the ward down in New Orleans, or, Houston. Like, how can we make, I have a good environment where when I go out for walking, everybody's walking, they wave, they talk. That's not every neighborhood.
That's true.
So so some things are more of a societal issue, and then other things are just, all of it's societal, but it's different things that are compounding or restricting our ability to participate in these types of behaviors. And so if I'm working a lot, I feel tired, I'm eating fast food, I'm feeding myself disease, I'm lethargic, I'm just gonna sit more, and I'm gonna try to numb myself through entertainment or different things like that. And, nobody's encouraging me or having these types of conversations to even change the behavior of a household or a neighborhood or a city. So I think it's a very, very big problem. But if one person, like that lady, that I was telling you about, can hear it, then that's one more person that has a quality of life. And that's the fight that we're in, right? We may not change the world, but we can change the way certain people think that want to face the truth.
And change our world. And I one thing I think is important, you said it earlier about our birth, and we're essentially born to die. And I know that, without getting too spiritual, but there's something going on in terms of the nature that man has. Since the fall of man, there's been this curse upon us that there's just something in us by birth to think negative, like automatic negative thoughts, to think about what could go wrong, to protect ourselves, to stay comfortable, to be self-preserving. And our brain is already wired that way before it ever comes in contact with any type of disease. And that's a disease within itself. And so it's one thing to know that all of us, just from a natural human perspective, we're in a body that is preparing itself to not remain here forever, right? But you got to decide if you want to live that way, right? Do you want to live a death-focused life?
Exactly.
Or do you want to live a fulfilling life? And so I think you bring up a very good point about we all are constrained. Like, I'm glad today in my life I'm in a neighborhood where I can go walk and, it's a beautiful environment, but that wasn't always the case. But there was always something you could do if you wanted to, right? To figure out a way to still do something, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about some things people watching this is saying. What you all are saying is really convicting, it's thought-provoking, it's sobering, but also informative. But what do I do? What can I do? Let's talk about what are some things people can do that all of us can do that, can go along with this research? So there's the World Health Organization and all the things that they came up with and some of the things that they said. But, what are some things we could tell people that we could do? Now, I know you and I have, we grew up a good portion of our lives together, playing sports, being very active. And now both of us in the years we're in now have made choices to still remain healthy and to, be conscious of what we eat. We still work out, we still keep our bodies moving in different ways, and we have different styles of doing that, but we remain committed to that. And I pray we continue to do that, right? But everyone that's listening at this, somebody listening now is obese and they need to change that. Somebody listening now is needs to, lower their blood pressure. Somebody's struggling with blood sugar. Someone's got a cholesterol issue. Somebody is maybe dealing with different nutrients in their body that they're deficient in, vitamin D or iron, or dealing with, vitamin B, whatever it is. And we get all this news and information, and we know that the difference between our life today and our life tomorrow is going to be the decisions we make about those things. So what are some things we could tell, some practical things that everyone could to leave here with that could make them think about action and not just knowledge?
Another loaded question, but I think it first starts with the mindset shift.
That's good.
So the mindset shift that we have to make is stop living to not want to die and live to live your life.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
So nobody wants to die, but people don't want to live either. Right? And so you have to live. It's almost like playing not to lose instead of playing to win.
Right.
Right? And so what we have to do is we have to make that simple mindset shift is I'm going to focus on quality of life. Sit down and ponder that question. I think, in this kind of society that you were describing a little bit earlier in terms of just wanting the instant gratification. No, sit down, get quiet, and contemplate, what do you want out of your life?
Right.
That's a critical question.
It really is, yeah.
And then build your life around going and getting that. And so I think that's the mindset shift. That's the foundation. Once we make up our mind that that's what we want, it's not going to just poof, it happens. We have to go get it now.
Right.
So now I have to start to design my life a little bit different. I have to start to change what I consume information. I have to change my physical environment. I have to start to get around people that have the same values that I do.
Critical, yeah.
I have to start to make sure that I put myself in the best situation to achieve the things. Like we talk about, a lot of the time people struggle to lose weight because they focus on losing weight instead of changing their environment, right? People focus on lowering their cholesterol because they're trying to focus on lowering instead of changing their environment. So I have to change my environment. I have to start to change the things that I do. And sometimes it starts personal before it can get into other areas of your life. You have to be the first partaker of that truth.
Right.
And, people don't want to face that because it's effort. But what's more effort? Taking medicine and feeling terrible every single day?
Right.
Or going for a walk and feeling great? Both of them take effort.
Yeah.
But what's more effort, right? And so when you start to really focus on quality of life, you start to build and design your life a lot different because you're playing a different game.
Right.
See, this country has taught people rules to a game, and it's based on their rules. And people are running around playing this game that's killing them. But you have to change the rules to the game, and you start playing a totally different game than everybody else. And it's tough because some people don't have access to the same information, but people who are watching this specific episode, there's gonna be more episodes that show up in your feed now because you're watching this one, and YouTube's gonna send you information that is valuable to you. Go down that rabbit hole and some of these other things that are unhealthy. These are things that don't cost you any money. If you go to the store, stay out of the aisle. Stay in the perimeter. Go grab real food. Right. I know that you might be on a budget, but do the best that you can to eat real food, right? And stay out of the middle aisle. There's things like that people just don't talk about. We talked about the 20 minutes a day. Get better sleep. Focus on your sleep. Try to go to sleep at a decent time and wake up at a decent time. Get your body in a rhythm. And what'll happen is over time, these tweaks that all of us can make, your chemistry and your biology will start to change for the better. Just like disease grows, health grows. And now you have the clarity back to the brain. Right. And you have the energy and you have the vibrance to start making better choices because you feel different about your outlook in life. So it starts with the mindset tweak and then designing the life that you want and then doing something different. I know that doesn't sound, the most beautiful, wonderful thing that I can do, but that's the truth. Right. And we have to accept it and just make it happen. And so I don't want to make it simple, but I don't want to make it totally difficult either. There's an incredible effort that's involved with this, but it's worth it. Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. I'm glad you kind of broke those areas down and gave some real tangible things. And I think, it's so true that you have to choose where you want to put your effort, and you have to choose what's going to be hard in life. If you think it's hard to stay on top of what you put in your body, to try to get better sleep, to, work out with some level of consistency every week, try the hardness of being sick. The hardness of the side effects of medication, the hardness of not being available to the ones that you love, the hardness of not being able to enjoy life because you don't feel good. Right. Something is gonna be hard. And if we make the decision to deal with the things that are sometimes feel hard, but in the end, make other parts of life easy. Yeah. And that's the thing that we want to do because, there's this X factor with all of us, and we all have to be in deep prayer about it, is that we don't know what will happen just that runs in our family, no matter what you do, just something that ran in your family, right? You're up against that just nothing you caused, it just happened. But whatever we can do to, increase our chances of not only not building disease, but also being able to combat that disease better if something should happen to us, because we're in a greater foundation of health and taking care of ourselves. But not only the health and taking care of ourselves, the mindset that you must use to confront every day living the life that you should be living to take care of yourself. That mindset, when you started off with mindset and belief, if you can deal with that now, when challenges hit your life or bad news does come up from a doctor or something does happen,
you've used that mindset before,
Right.
of how to do what you don't want to do
Yes.
to get a result.
Yeah.
And that is probably more valuable than anything.
You built a
because
muscle.
You built a muscle. So I know we've been talking about this, and I really enjoying this, but I want you to give some final thoughts about, what are some final thoughts you could give to those out there that are listening to this? Anything you want to say? I mean, you've touched on so much, a lot of just gems and jewels. You even, shared what your dad went through, what you went through, what your family went through. What are some things, we're here, this is another URCO episode.
Right.
We talk about the ultimate freedom. We talk about, making sure that we really are being the CEO of our life and the decision maker in our life. What would you say to the URSO community as a lasting thought from this discussion?
Well, maybe going full circle back to the spirit of the article, I would say, Michael, that don't ignore the whispers. Ultimate freedom comes with accepting truth.
That's right.
Right? There's no freedom without truth. Don't ignore the whispers. There are studies that are showing that disease is rampant more than ever. You can find counter things that say we're living longer, this, that, and the other, but I'm talking about quality of life.
Yeah.
Right? Who wants to live longer with dementia?
Exactly.
Right? And so we're trying to talk about quality of life. So don't ignore what you see. Don't ignore what's in your family. Don't even ignore your own body. Don't ignore the whisper. I'm saying that on purpose because if you ignore the whisper, it's going to start screaming at some point.
Yep.
And that could be too late. And so a lot of people avoid going to the doctor because they're trying to avoid truth.
Right.
Some people can't afford even medical coverage, which is unfortunate. I wish they could. Don't ignore this conversation. Do some of the things that we were talking about here that doesn't even take a doctor.
Right.
There's a certain amount of control. There's a certain amount of things that we could take hold of that we can do to improve the quality of your life. Don't ignore the whispers, because at some point, it's gonna come back and start screaming at you.
Yeah.
And so just accept that truth. And when you do that, it's actually a lot of freedom in that because you no longer have to be afraid.
Yeah.
The one common denominator is we're all gonna die one day. And the more that we understand the process and that cycle of life, we're free from that now and we focus on living.
Yeah.
And that's what I would tell people to do.
Very good. It's that little line in between those two dates that we want to get the most out of.
Absolutely.
And so I want to thank you so much for everything you shared, Terry. This has really been wonderful. It's been outstanding. I appreciate the things that you've, left into this episode. I know a lot of people are going to benefit from your story and the things that you shared. I want to just say something to all of you that are, looking at this episode. I can't say enough about how important it is not to ignore the things that we've discussed. And, I run into this a lot, especially with men, but not to just pick on them, but I have to call them out, that don't like to get their tests, don't like to get their checkups, don't like to go to the dentist, don't like to do whatever is required to know what's going on. And, in a sense, there's a lot of us that are guilty of that. And when you don't know things, you can't prepare, you can't adjust. And in any war, one of the greatest things you could ever have is communication, information, to know what's going on so that you can prepare for the battle. And so everything begins with knowledge. I want to invite you, make sure you stay up on those things, and then take the things that you learned and that you heard to motivate you. Get around people who are having this conversation. Get around people who have this type of energy about them. Because when you get around people who don't care, you'll find out that you start to not care. So you don't want to be in a situation where the things that matter are the things being pulled away from you because you're literally around a conversation that is causing you to do so. So make sure as the CEO of your life, you have to build your own C-suite, your surrounding network of people who you allow to guide and motivate you to go in the direction that you want to go because you're the CEO of your life. take what you've heard and let's do something about it, because this disease has been too successful, and I think we can reduce the success by implementing the things that we heard today. Until next time, I hope to see you on our future episodes at URCO. I'm Michael E. Parker. God bless you.